Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, where cities never sleep, but spirits never leave. In these modern towers of steel and glass, there are floors that were never numbered, doors that were never meant to open, and echoes that rise from concrete long after the workers are gone. Every corner of this continent holds forgotten prayers, sealed chambers, and wandering shadows, bound not by time, but by memory. We do not tell stories, we unearth what was buried. So tonight, if you hear footsteps between two floors that don't exist, don't follow, just listen. This is the floor that was never built, yet someone lives there.
Lena arrived at the tower just after dusk, her luggage wheels echoing faintly against the polished marble of the lobby. The concierge barely looked up, simply pointed to the elevator and said, "Ninth floor, Unit 9A. Welcome to Sora Heights." The building was new, too new. Everything smelled of synthetic polish and concrete dust that hadn't quite settled. But there was something colder beneath the scent, something not quite right. She pressed the call button and waited. The elevator doors slid open with a smooth hiss. Inside, brushed steel mirrored the silence. She glanced at the panel of buttons and frowned. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. No 8. At first, she assumed it was cultural. She'd heard of hotels and high-rises omitting unlucky numbers. But when the elevator passed the 7th floor, there was a noticeable pause, a gentle shudder. Then it continued up. Unit 9A was directly above 7C. Yet, if there were no 8th floor, how did that make sense? Still, the apartment was beautiful. Crisp, white walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a kitchen untouched, its steel still wrapped in thin plastic. It felt sterile, preserved, like it hadn't just been unoccupied, but untouched. She unpacked slowly, laying out her sketchbooks, her survey tools, her laptop. She had taken this job specifically for the quiet, a remote position drafting urban development zones for a new city proposal. They had offered her the place at a steep discount. The email said, "Unoccupied premium unit, no known complaints." But that first night, as the city lights flickered below her window, she couldn't sleep. It wasn't the mattress, it wasn't the hum of the air system. It was the sound, faint but clear, of footsteps above her. Soft, slow, like bare feet padding across concrete. She sat up in bed, her ears straining, checked the clock. 3:13 a.m. She got up, slipped on her robe, and stepped into the hallway. It was empty, bright, clean. She looked up at the ceiling, trying to imagine what lay beyond. If there were no 8th floor, who was walking up there? The next morning, Lena approached the concierge. "There's a unit above mine, 9A, but I'm hearing footsteps from upstairs." The concierge looked confused. "There's nothing above you except 10B, but that's on the opposite end of the building. You're directly over 7C. Lena hesitated. "So there's no 8th floor at all?" He smiled politely. "No, miss, that floor was never part of the construction. A lot of new developments skipped that number for cultural reasons. But structurally, there should be something. No space between 7 and 9? He shrugged politely. "Elevator goes from 7 to 9. There's no key for 8, no access, no space." He turned his attention back to the check-in screen. "Is there anything else?" Lena left, her thoughts spiraling. That night, She lay awake again, waiting, listening. 3:13 a.m. This time the footsteps were slower, closer. She held her breath as they moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, and then stopped. She reached for her phone and began to record. The screen captured her ceiling, her breath, her still room. But when she played the video back, she noticed something odd. For a split second, a flicker, there was a shadow cast on the ceiling, moving as if someone had walked just above the light. But the floor above didn't exist. She paused the video, scrubbed through slowly, and froze the frame. There, a faint silhouette. It looked like someone standing still, facing downward, as though they were listening. The next day, Lena reviewed the building's layout again on her laptop. She cross-referenced it with her firm's regional zoning database. Every floor had a matching blueprint, except floor 8. It was skipped completely, not even a placeholder, just 7, 9. Curious, she accessed the city records and scrolled through construction filings for Sora Heights. The original proposal did include an 8th floor, a mezzanine or meditation space, it seemed, but a red line edit had slashed through it during a revision. Red text across the margin read, "Omit level 8. Do not excavate core shaft. Use false slab insulation." That wasn't standard. Not at all. It meant something had been sealed, not just skipped. Later that night, Lena wandered the hallway outside her unit with a soft rubber mallet. She gently tapped along the walls and floor. Hollow, hollow, solid, solid, hollow. Above the elevator door, where the shaft should lead from 7 to 9, there was an audible difference in the wall material. Something had been filled, covered, disguised. She placed her palm against it and whispered, "What are you hiding?" And the air grew cold. So cold she saw her breath. She backed away slowly and returned to her room, locked the door. That night, the footsteps returned at 3:13 a.m. This time, they didn't just walk. They stopped directly above her bed and didn't move.
The second night, Lena didn't intend to stay awake. She'd worked late, finalizing designs for a new complex her firm was planning across the river, a place that would one day mirror the skyline outside her window. But as the clock crept closer to 3, the memory of the night before pulled at her attention. She muted the soft hum of her computer and waited. Outside, the city was quiet. Cars hummed distantly, traffic lights blinked red to no one, and the building's ventilation whispered softly through the vents. Then, almost exactly on cue, it came again. Footsteps, faint, steady, coming from above, like someone walking in circles, bare feet dragging slightly across unfinished concrete. She counted them. 7 steps, pause, 6 back, a turn, then again. She froze, barely breathing, eyes locked on the ceiling. It was not the muffled sound of pipes or walls contracting. It was unmistakably human. She picked up her phone, opened the recording app, and let it capture the silence between sounds. When she replayed it, the footsteps were softer, almost erased, but underneath something else trembled. A hum, a low rhythmic vibration, almost like chanting. In the morning, she went to the 7th floor. Unit 7C was directly below hers. A young couple lived there, friendly faces, polite smiles, the kind of neighbors who kept their shoes by the door. "I'm sorry," Lena began awkwardly, "but have you heard anything strange at night? Maybe footsteps between floors?" The woman frowned. "No, it's usually very quiet here." Her husband added with a tired grin, "The walls are thick. You'd be the first person to hear anything." Lena hesitated. "Would you mind if I listened for a moment, just from your living room?"
The couple exchanged glances, but agreed. She stepped inside. The apartment layout mirrored hers perfectly. Same structure, same air vent alignment. But it felt warmer, lived in. She tilted her head upward and listened. Nothing, just the hum of electricity. The wife spoke again softly. "You know, when we moved in, my husband thought there was an 8th floor too. He said it felt like there should be one more landing in the stairwell, but they told us it was just design illusion." Lena looked up sharply. "What do you mean, should be?" The woman shrugged. "The staircase between 7 and 9 feels longer than the others, like there's an extra half flight, but it leads nowhere." Lena thanked them, trying not to reveal her growing unease. That night, she climbed the stairs herself. The stairwell was quiet, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The walls were smooth, recently painted, smelling faintly of cleaning solution and cement. She walked from the 6th to the 7th, 7 steps per flight. From the 7th to the 9th, 14 steps. Her pace slowed. Halfway between 7 and 9, the temperature shifted. A sudden pocket of cold air drifted through the stairwell, brushing her skin like a breath. The light above flickered once, then again. She stopped and leaned close to the wall, pressing her palm to the paint. It was colder than it should be, and there, beneath her fingers, a faint vibration. Not mechanical, not a pipe, almost like someone was breathing inside the wall. Her heart pounded. She turned to leave, but froze. From somewhere above, she heard it again. Tap, tap, drag. Slow, deliberate steps. She looked up the stairwell, but the space above her head was empty, just a wall where the 8th floor should have been. Still, the sound came from there, from inside the wall. She returned to her unit and replayed the recording again. This time, she listened carefully, not to the steps, but to the spaces between them. And she realized something. The sound wasn't traveling down from above. It was resonating through the concrete itself, like an echo that had never stopped moving. That night, she barely slept. In the morning, she went to the security office on the ground floor. A guard sat behind a bank of small black and white monitors, most of them showing empty corridors or the flicker of elevator lights. "Excuse me," Lena said. "I live on the 9th floor, 9A. I've been hearing noises at night. Could you check the feed between 7 and 9? The guard looked up, confused. "There's no camera feed between those floors." She frowned. "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because there's nothing there. The elevators skip from 7 to 9. That whole section isn't wired." "Isn't wired?" He nodded slowly, uneasy now. "You're not the first person to ask. A tenant from 9B complained last month too, said he heard children playing in the vents. We checked everything, nothing on record." "Children?" "Yeah." The guard rubbed his temples. "Management said it was interference from the street, but that floor, it does weird things to sound." Lena stared at the monitors. For a moment, she thought one of them flickered. The camera pointed at the 7th floor landing. A shape moved past the edge of the frame. Small, barefoot, then gone. That evening, Lena stood in her hallway again. She placed a small glass of water on the floor directly below where she heard the noises. She wanted to test something. At 3:13 a.m., the footsteps began. Slow, measured like before. The water rippled. Not from vibration below, but from above, as if gravity had briefly reversed itself. Her breath caught in her throat. Then, from the ceiling, a faint knock. 3 times. She whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only silence. But when she looked up again, she realized something that turned her blood cold. The dust pattern on the ceiling had shifted. 2 small barefoot prints were now outlined in the pale gray. She didn't sleep at all. By dawn, she was sitting on her bed, her laptop open to the old construction blueprints again. And this time, she noticed something she'd missed before. There was a narrow corridor labeled Service Shaft 8A, faintly crossed out with red ink. Next to it, handwritten in pencil, a note read, "Keep sealed. Do not reopen. No light." She stared at it for a long time, then whispered to herself, "There is no 8th floor, but someone is walking there."
The morning light was pale and unwelcome. Lena hadn't slept. Her curtains remained drawn, her skin prickled with unease, and her ceiling felt heavier, as if the space above it had grown thicker overnight. The glass of water still sat on the floor, the ripples long faded, but her memory hadn't. She turned back to the blueprint file, this time not through the tenant portal, but via her own secure access as a licensed architect. The project files for Sora Heights were extensive, buried in folders that had been passed between 3 firms. She filtered for structural plans, opened the earliest version, and stopped. The original blueprint included a floor 8. 8th floor, meditation hall plus private utility storage. A wide space that stretched across the full span of the building. It had columns, ventilation points, and structural notes, even a floor drainage system. But in the next revision, just a few weeks later, it was gone. No relocation, no repurpose, just a hard red stroke through the entire section. In its place, a blank void. The document labeled it simply as slab insert, non-occupied. Lena's hand trembled slightly as she zoomed in. A faint notation in the margin, nearly invisible, read, "Level redacted due to containment protocol. See supplemental doc number 08-S. She searched for 08-S. It wasn't in the digital folder. She called her colleague Daisuke, who'd helped design the electrical layouts for the building early on. "You worked on Sora Heights, right?" she asked. There was a pause on the line. Then, briefly, "Why?" "I'm living in 9A. I've been looking at the construction files. Something weird about the 8th floor." He laughed, but it didn't sound amused. "Yeah, weird's one word for it. What happened?" "I wasn't there for that part. They pulled half the team when it changed hands. But I remember the floor plans. There was definitely a floor 8. "And then?" "They sealed it." His voice dropped. "And they told us to never speak about it again." Later that day, Lena visited the city's development archive office. She requested the physical planning documents. Sometimes old notes survived where digital ones were scrubbed. The clerk, a thin woman with an old-fashioned calculator watch, flipped through her logs. When Lena gave the project number, her eyes narrowed. "You're looking into Sora Heights?" the clerk asked. Lena nodded. "There's a file, but it's not for public release. I'm an architect. I'm part of the internal verification team." The clerk hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, "They buried something, you know, not just concrete. I saw the original inspection order. They skipped the spiritual clearance." Lena blinked. "The what?" "Before major builds, especially residential towers, we're supposed to conduct a traditional clearance, a symbolic asking of permission for the ground, for anything previously built there." "Did they do?" "They started, but something interrupted it. The monk they brought refused to continue, said the space had no breath. Then he left without finishing the chant." Lena's stomach dropped. "And the 8th floor?"
The clerk looked away. "I only know that the record was marked blind spot approved. That's rare. It means they accepted an uninspected level as long as it was sealed and stayed sealed." That night, Lena didn't even try to sleep. She printed the earliest blueprint, the one that still showed floor 8, and laid it across her kitchen counter. According to the drawing, the center of the meditation hall would be directly above her dining area. She looked up at the ceiling. It seemed smooth, normal, but now she saw it differently. Not as a ceiling, but as a floor of something forgotten. She retrieved her laser measure, measured from the floor of her unit to the ceiling, then walked down to the 7th floor and measured from its ceiling to its floor. The numbers didn't match. There was an extra 1.4 meters unaccounted for. Enough room for one thin, low-ceilinged chamber. At 3:13 a.m., the footsteps began again. But this time, they weren't pacing. They were dragging. One foot shuffling, one foot stepping, as if the person walking was wounded. Lena sat beneath the spot marked center beam on the blueprint. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound didn't echo anymore. It moved around her, in a circle, above her head, then slightly behind her, then beside her. She opened her eyes in panic. The apartment was empty, but the air had thickened, as if the walls were sweating. She stood and looked at the mirror near her front door. For a second, just a flicker, there was a second reflection, a figure behind her, bent, silent, no face, just long hanging black hair and bare, wet feet. She spun around. Nothing. Only the silence of something that had never left. The next day, she drove to the construction company's headquarters. Inside, she found nothing. No employees from the original Sora Heights project. No archived files. Only a plaque on the wall that read, "Project 8 null, do not resurrect." She took a photo of it, but when she checked her phone moments later, the photo was gone, deleted, as if it had never existed. Back home, Lena opened the blueprint file one last time. This time, she adjusted the contrast, boosted the shadows, brightened the background layers. And there, beneath the white overlays, was a faint image, a floor plan etched in with pencil, drawn by hand, smeared and unfinished. But one detail. At the center of floor 8, a small circle. Inside it, scribbled words in faded ink. "Hold her here." The morning after, Lena sat hunched over her laptop with dark circles under her eyes. The blueprints haunted her screen like ghosts of geometry, lines and marks erased but not gone. Her head throbbed. The whispers from the night before still rang faintly in her ears, echoing from somewhere between sleep and waking. And then an idea came to her. If the blueprints had been altered, maybe the survey images hadn't. Every construction phase required a photographic record, visual proof of progress for investors, insurance, and compliance. The archive for these was rarely checked after completion. She logged into the National Construction Registry and scrolled through the dated folders. The project's name flashed on the screen. Sora Heights Development, Build Phase 1 to 7. She kept scrolling. There was no folder labeled 8, but between 7 and 9, there was an unlabeled directory, marked only with a hyphen. -. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside were only 3 photographs, all grayscale, all heavily compressed. She clicked on the first, a wide shot of workers installing rebar frames, empty, silent, just concrete and rods. The second photo, slightly higher angle, showed a hollow space lit by a single construction lamp. The third was different. At first glance, it was similar. Scaffolding, debris, wires coiled like veins. But in the center of the frame, standing amid the chaos, was a woman. Not a worker, not wearing any safety gear, just there. Her hair fell across her face. Her clothes looked soaked, though the site had been dry. Her mouth was open, as if caught in mid-scream, yet no sound could exist in the photograph. She zoomed in, but the resolution began to break apart. Still, something in the posture struck her, the way the woman's hands hung by her sides, fingers crooked inward like claws half curled around an invisible weight. She checked the metadata. Date, March 18, 2014. Location, Floor 8, South Frame Section. Her heart stopped for a moment. The 8th floor, the one that didn't exist. She copied the image and sent it to Daisuke with a single message. "Tell me you see her." His reply came 5 minutes later. "Delete this, now." She typed back, "Who is she?" Another pause. Then, "That photo wasn't supposed to survive. It was taken the day of the accident." Lena stared at her screen. "What accident?" she whispered aloud. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. No further reply. She stared at the image again. The woman's blurred eyes seemed to follow her from one corner of the screen to the next. The reflection of her own monitor glowed faintly across the glass of her window, and for a second she swore she saw another face reflected there, just behind her shoulder. By evening, Lena's paranoia had grown roots. She printed the photograph, clipped it to her wall, and circled the faint background details, the rebar, the angle of the beam, the number scrawled in chalk on a concrete column. 808. Unit 808. Her pulse quickened. The space she discovered on the blueprint, the chamber between 7 and 9, had a marking in that area labeled Subspace 8A. Had this been part of it? She traced her finger along the printed photo. The woman's outline looked too solid. The motion blur wasn't from a camera, it was from movement. She had been moving while the picture was taken, as if she had still been alive. Lena packed her bag and drove across the city to the municipal records warehouse, where physical copies of inspection photos were kept in cold archives. She signed in under her firm's credentials. The archivist, a middle-aged man in a pale blue vest, checked the reference number. "You're looking for the Sora Heights file?" "Yes. 2014 batch?" He frowned. "That one's restricted. Most of those photos were transferred to private custody after an incident." "What incident?" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "You really don't know?" She shook her head. The archivist leaned closer. "They poured the 8th floor slab before the full crew had cleared it. 2 people were still below. One made it out, the other," he trailed off, "was never recovered." Lena felt her breath tighten. "You mean she was buried?" He looked at her carefully. "They said they dug through the night, found nothing, eventually declared it a miscount. You know how these projects are. Tight deadlines, tighter pockets. Someone signed off the closure. The blueprints were redacted." Her throat felt dry. "Who was she?" The archivist's eyes flicked toward the rows of cabinets. "She was a structural analyst, young, hired temporary. They only ever mentioned her first name in the notes." "What name?" He paused. "Miko." Lena froze. Miko, the same name she'd seen scrawled faintly on red on the old blueprint file, the one marked hold her here. Back in her car, she couldn't stop shaking. The photo of the woman in the concrete skeleton seemed to burn in her mind. When she got home, she set the printed photo on her counter and stepped back. Her apartment felt heavier now, quieter, as if the walls were listening. She stared at the woman's silhouette again, her head slightly tilted, her bare feet visible beneath the soaked hem of her clothes. And then she noticed something she hadn't before. In the bottom corner of the photograph, behind one of the concrete columns, was another shape, small, half hidden. A child's hand, pressed against the unfinished wall. Lena backed away from the image, her breath coming shallow. The ceiling creaked once above her, as if something had shifted its weight. She turned off the lights and sat in the dark, clutching the printout. The glow from the city bled through the blinds, faintly illuminating her walls. And there, faint but undeniable, was the outline of a woman's shadow on her ceiling. Not moving, just standing, still caught mid-scream. The photo slipped from her trembling fingers to the floor. When she bent to pick it up again, the image had changed. The woman's mouth was closed now, but her eyes were open and staring directly at Lena. The hallway outside Lena's door smelled different that morning. Not of cleaning chemicals or fresh paint, but something older. Dust and incense, the kind that clings to abandoned temples. She checked her mail slot, empty. But on the floor, someone had slid a single piece of yellowing newsprint under her door. Sora Heights halts mid-construction. Structural redesign underway. The date was from 10 years ago. The photo showed the unfinished building surrounded by scaffolding. But there, half obscured by shadow, was a flat concrete platform. It hovered awkwardly between the 7th and 9th floors like an unspoken word. No signage, no windows, just blank. Lena ran her finger across the caption. A smudge of ink had soaked through part of the date. The exact day, unreadable. She slipped the paper into her folder of findings and decided to speak to someone who had been in the building longer than she had, maybe longer than anyone else. Unit 6A, Mr. Haruto, the only tenant listed since the building opened. Elderly, quiet, always in a pressed shirt with indoor slippers. When she knocked, he answered with tired eyes and a voice like paper. "You've heard them, haven't you?" he asked without preamble. Lena blinked. "The footsteps?" He nodded once. "They walk in the space they were never given." She hesitated. "There is no 8th floor, not officially." "That's what they want us to say." His voice was steady, but I remember, before they sealed it, before they changed the buttons. Lena leaned in. "They changed the elevator?" "They reprogrammed it, took out the key slot. There used to be a manual override. You could press and hold 7, 9, and floor close at the same time, and the doors would open halfway up." "Open to what?" He stared at her, eyes suddenly sharp. "A hallway with no lights, just concrete and an old prayer mat." Lena felt a chill crawl up her back. "Did you ever go in?" Haruto looked away. "No, I never stepped inside, but something once stepped out." That night, Lena stood in the elevator. She pressed 7, then 9, then the door close button, held them down. The lights dimmed. The elevator began to rise, slower than usual. The numbers flickered. 7, 8, 9. 8. It flashed for a split second. The elevator jolted to a stop. The doors hissed open. Not all the way, just enough to show a crack of shadow. There was no hallway light, no sound, but she could smell something. Old wood, moist concrete, and incense. The doors stayed open for 3 seconds, then slammed shut. The elevator resumed its course to the 9th floor, like nothing had happened. Back in her unit, Lena sat on the floor with every file spread around her. Photos, emails, scanned permits, handwritten notes. The one that stood out now was a folded engineering diagram from the electrical contractor. It showed power lines snaking through floors, each breaker labeled, but floor 8 had a red box drawn around it with a single word: dead. No circuits, no power, no wiring. And yet, it existed. Somewhere between 7 and 9, it waited. Not powered, not numbered, but still alive. The next day, she tracked down the name of the electrician who had signed that diagram, a man named Kenji Takada, now retired. He agreed to meet her in a noodle shop outside the city. He spoke slowly, stirring his tea. Back in 2014, we got a call during slab pouring. Elevator was acting strange, stopping at phantom levels, doors opening to blank walls. "What did you find?" Lena asked. Kenji wiped his hands on a napkin. "We accessed the service shaft. There was an access platform between floors. Wasn't part of our plans." "Was it a storage level?" "No. It was hollow, but the walls weren't insulated. They were hand-bricked, almost like a shrine." He glanced at her. "There was a crack in one of the beams. When I looked through it, I saw something." Lena leaned forward. "What?" He paused. "A woman, sitting in the corner, head down, hands folded like she was praying. I blinked, and she was gone." Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you tell anyone?" Kenji laughed bitterly. "They said I was overtired, told me it was shadows playing tricks." He looked up at her. "But shadows don't wear white robes soaked in water." That night, Lena recorded the elevator panel, held the buttons again, waited. The lights dimmed. The camera caught it. 8 appeared again, just for a second. When the doors opened, she reached toward the gap with her flashlight's beam. The beam of light flickered, then revealed a doorknob, an old, rusted one. But there was no door, just wall and a faint outline where a frame used to be. The phone battery died instantly. The elevator dropped her off at 9. She stood there, breathless, hands shaking, and she knew that floor had never been removed. It had been buried alive. Lena had stopped trusting silence, because in this building, silence wasn't absence. It was tension, waiting to shift. And when it did, it shifted at 3:13 a.m. every night. Not 3:12, not 3:14, always that exact moment. It was a time the building remembered, even if no one else did. That evening, Lena stood in the hallway just outside her apartment. The air smelled of concrete dust and something faintly bitter, like burnt incense crushed under a boot. The wall-length mirror beside her door had always felt too large for the space. It reflected the opposite corridor, beige wallpaper, numbered doors, overhead lights. But tonight, as the hour crept closer to 3:13, the reflection began to blur. Not from fog, not from her breath. The hallway inside the mirror had changed.
Her body stiffened. Where the mirrored image of the hallway should have shown 7 doors, it now showed 8. And there, between units 7C and 9A, stood a door she'd never seen before. 808. Black numbers, faded brass knob, no peephole, no light under the frame. She turned around slowly. Her real hallway was unchanged. No extra door, just blank wall. But in the mirror, it remained. And then, the light above her began to flicker. The reflection of 808 glowed faintly, as if something behind it had stirred. Lena stepped forward. She raised her hand toward the mirror. Her fingers met the cool surface, but her reflection didn't match. It was slightly off. Her mirrored self's head was tilted a little too far. The eyes didn't blink in sync. She dropped her hand and stepped back. The reflection smiled, but Lena hadn't. She slammed her door shut and locked it, pulled every curtain closed, switched on all the lights. But the feeling didn't leave. The air pressed against her skin, like the walls were inhaling. She opened her phone and reviewed the footage from the elevator again. In one of the frames, the second the doors had cracked open on 8, there was a shape. Not a figure, just the imprint of one. A shadow on the back wall, slumped, hair down, head bowed. She zoomed in, and there, behind it, barely visible, a mirror, leaning against the wall of that hidden hallway, and her own reflection in it. By the next day, Lena couldn't bear to look at mirrors. In her bathroom, she brushed her teeth with the light off. In the kitchen, she covered the microwave's glass with a dish towel. But the hallway mirror was fixed to the wall, too wide to ignore, too heavy to remove. So she taped over it with newspaper. That night, she couldn't sleep. At 3:13 a.m., the taped paper began to peel, from the edges inward, quietly, like unseen fingers were picking at the corners. Lena stared from her bed, wide-eyed. One strip fell loose and fluttered to the floor, then another, until the mirror was visible again, and so was 808. This time, the door in the reflection was open, just a crack, darkness beyond it. And behind the door frame, a figure leaned forward, not stepping out, just watching, bent sideways, neck tilted, as if trying to listen. Her own reflection stood frozen beside the figure, still, breathing, but not blinking. In the morning, she taped the entire mirror with blackout cloth. Then she searched the building schematics again. There had once been a mirror hallway planned on floor 8 across from a proposed meditation room. One of the notations read, "Reflective installation for spiritual balance, to hold what cannot be named." The words turned her blood cold. Hold what cannot be named, as if the mirror wasn't for seeing, but for containing. Later that evening, she met again with Mr. Haruto from 6A. "I saw it, in the mirror." He nodded solemnly. "You looked too long." "What happens now?" He touched her wrist gently. "Now it watches back." She shivered. "Why the mirror?" Haruto looked toward the hallway window. "Because spirits cannot enter through locked doors, but they can reflect where they once were, especially if no one ever called their name."
That night, Lena sat in front of the mirror with a candle, just one. No sound, no phone, no cameras, just her. And at 3:13 a.m., the mirror peeled away again. But this time, instead of 808, she saw herself in Unit 9A, sitting in the dark, eyes open, hands folded in her lap. But something was standing behind her, hair dripping, hands twitching, mouth whispering words she couldn't hear. She looked over her shoulder. Nothing. But when she looked back into the mirror, the Lena inside was no longer looking at the camera. She was looking straight at her. And then she mouthed a single word: open. And in the mirror, the door to 808 swung wide open.
The walls had begun to breathe, not in the way buildings creak when they settle, but in long, rhythmic sighs, as if the concrete itself inhaled the memories it once sealed in. Lena first heard it on a Wednesday. The time was always the same, 3:13 a.m. But this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was scratching, a long, drawn-out scrape, as if fingernails were being dragged along brick from the inside out. She pressed her ear to the wall between her kitchen and hallway. The sound grew clearer. Not just scratching, but weeping. Muffled sobs, a voice too broken to cry out, but too persistent to vanish. She traced the noise to the large hallway mirror, now fully covered in blackout cloth. Something behind it pulsed. She could feel it. With shaking hands, she peeled the fabric off. Behind it, the mirror was still, but the wall behind the frame sounded hollow. She tapped the edges. Left side solid, right side empty. She took a screwdriver and loosened the mirror's mounts. Dust fell as she pried it loose. Behind it was a recessed panel, old wood, slightly warped from moisture, painted the same color as the wall, but clearly added later. There were no nails, just a handle, and a faint red handprint pressed into the wood. Small, child-sized, faded by time. Lena hesitated, then opened the panel. Behind it, a stairwell. Narrow, dust-choked, descending slightly before rising again, like a wound stitched crookedly into the building's spine. There were no lights, only a faint amber glow, as if from a candle long burned out. She descended slowly. Each step creaked, though the stairs were made of concrete. Halfway down, she saw writing scrawled on the walls, not in ink, not in paint, but in ashes. Smears of soot dragged in frantic looping circles, and words repeated over and over. "Let me out, let me out, let me out." She turned a corner and found a small landing. It didn't connect to anything, just a space. No door, no window, just air so still it felt held. And in the center of the landing, a pile of dust and broken wood, as if a door had once been there and had been shattered from the inside. She crouched and examined the debris. Among the splinters was a shard of something reflective, not glass, but mirror. She held it up. In the reflection, She didn't see herself. She saw a girl, kneeling, back turned, head bowed, wearing a white uniform shirt, soaked and torn. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her face was blurred, but her lips were moving. No sound. Lena lowered the shard. Nothing there. The landing was empty. She looked again. The girl was closer, now staring, her mouth still moving. Lena pressed the shard against the wall. The girl reached out from inside the reflection. Her palm met Lena's. On the mirror shard, a bloody handprint appeared. And then the girl vanished. Lena stumbled back up the stairs, heart pounding, sealed the panel, rehung the mirror. But it was too late. Something had shifted. The scratches now came from inside her walls, every hour, every corner, clawing softly, persistently. She recorded it, played it back, and underneath the scratching was chanting, low, whispered, over and over again. Open the door, finish the prayer. Open the door, finish the prayer. The next day, she confronted the building manager, a man named Koji who had avoided her since she moved in. I need to see the original inspection report, the one from the 8th floor. He looked panicked. There is no 8th floor. Don't lie to me. He sighed, then whispered, You should move out. You've seen too much already. Who was she? Lena asked. Who did they seal inside? He looked away, then said, It wasn't that we didn't know she was there. We couldn't find her. The prayer was supposed to guide her out, but she wouldn't leave. She said she was waiting for someone, and when the floor closed, she stayed inside, listening. That night, Lena sat in her hallway again. The mirror was off the wall, the panel uncovered. She waited, eyes open, hands folded, and at 3:13 a.m., she heard breathing behind the wall. Close, soft, but wrong. It wasn't human. It was too patient, too still. And then, a knock. 3 times, from behind the panel. She leaned in, placed her hand on the wood, and this time, it knocked back.
The knock had changed everything. Not the sound, but the response. The fact that something behind the panel had answered, not with a sound, but with awareness. Lena didn't sleep. She sat with the lights off, her hands folded in her lap, the broken mirror shard on the table beside her. And when dawn came, it brought no comfort, just light falling on walls that no longer felt like walls. By mid-morning, she ventured downstairs. She needed air, but the elevator lights flickered violently as she approached, so she took the stairs. And that's where she saw her, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8, sitting alone on the half landing between the 7th and 8th floor, the space that shouldn't exist. Her hair was black and damp, her legs drawn to her chest. She wore a faded white blouse and a pleated school skirt stained dark at the hem. She looked up at Lena and smiled. "Hi." Lena froze. "Hi, are you lost?" The girl shook her head. "I live here." Lena blinked. "Where?" 808. The words hit her like cold water. There is no Unit 808, Lena said softly. The girl tilted her head. There is. You just can't see it yet. Lena crouched. What's your name? The girl smiled again. Miko. Lena's breath caught. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out her phone, opened the photo of the construction image, the blurred woman mid-screen. Miko, is this your mother? Miko leaned forward, her small finger hovering over the screen. Then she tapped the shadowed figure in the background, not the woman, the faint outline of the child's hand on the wall. That's me. And then, without another word, she stood and walked up the stairs toward a landing that didn't exist. Lena followed. But at the top, there was only a blank wall. No door, no opening, just a smooth, cold surface and the faint scent of damp earth. Miko was gone. That afternoon, Lena visited the city archives again, not the architectural department, the mortuary records. She told the clerk she was researching a legacy tenant, gave only a first name, Miko. The clerk hesitated, searched slowly, then narrowed her eyes. There's a record, but it's flagged. Flagged? The woman leaned closer. Marked as unverified remains, means body unrecovered. She pulled the file. A single page. Miko Hoshino, age 9. Died March 18, 2014. Cause, crushed during foundation collapse. Status, location unknown. Lena stared at the page. There was a faded photo stapled at the top corner. School uniform, smile too wide for her face, hair tied with pink ribbon. She looked exactly like the girl on the stairwell. Lena drove straight to the construction headquarters. The original company had dissolved, but one former site supervisor still had an office in a subleased room. His name was Mr. Oda. He was gray-haired now, with a limp. When she brought up Sora Heights, his hands began to tremble. I told them not to pour the slab. 2 workers were still inside. They said we had to meet deadline, that the chamber wasn't part of final planning. And the girl? Lena asked. Oda nodded slowly. We were told she was playing in the utility shaft, that she didn't belong there, that her death was the fault of poor supervision. Lena clenched her fists. But you didn't find her body. Oda looked at her, tears in his eyes. No, and that's what scared us, because sometimes, in the weeks after, the concrete would sweat, and we'd hear humming, like a child singing to herself. That night, Lena stood outside her apartment. The mirror was gone. The panel remained open. At 3:13 a.m., she sat in the stairwell landing, the one where she had seen Miko, and she whispered softly, I see you now. I believe you. You are not forgotten. There was silence. Then, a soft giggle. She turned. Miko stood beside her again, this time crying. I was waiting for someone to say my name. Lena reached out. Miko took her hand, and for the first time, the cold in the stairwell began to warm. But as Lena looked up, she noticed something terrifying. Behind Miko, emerging from the dark stair above, was a second figure, not a child,
not smiling, a woman, face pale and cracked like stone, eyes empty, lips sealed with thread. She reached forward and placed her hand on Miko's shoulder. And Lena understood. This was not Miko's mother. It was something else, something that had kept her here.
The woman behind Miko was not living. That much Lena understood immediately. She wasn't hovering. She wasn't floating. She stood with weight, as if the concrete itself had made room for her. And the moment her fingers touched Miko's shoulder, the stairwell grew cold again. Not temperature, but memory. Lena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Miko turned slowly, looked at the woman, then looked back at Lena with wide, pleading eyes. "She won't let me go," the girl whispered. "She said if I leave, she disappears." Then, just as quickly, they were gone, vanished into the darkness above the stairwell. The next morning, Lena left the building, not to run, but to chase a truth too many had buried. She drove east to an industrial district where the original cement supplier had operated. What she found was a rusted storage yard and a single trailer office. Inside, she met a man named Hiroshi, a retired foreman who had worked on dozens of buildings. When she mentioned Sora Heights, his hands tensed. He poured tea without asking and sat without smiling. "We poured over it once, but it never dried clean." "What do you mean?" Lena asked. "There's a way concrete should behave. It settles, cures, holds." He looked out the window. But in that building, it wept. He took out an old folder from a drawer, one stained with time and ash. Inside were old logs, concrete batch receipts, and one faded Polaroid. It showed the 8th floor during the first pour. Concrete halfway set, pipes exposed, forms still held in place. But in the middle of the image, there was a dark stain, spreading in a spiral, like something had pushed up from beneath the surface. Hiroshi tapped the photo. That's where she was. We didn't know at first. She'd fallen in through a vent gap. They told us she'd been retrieved, but we found her shoe the next morning. He reached into the folder and pulled out the photo of a child's shoe, small, white, the sole crusted with gray cement. They still made us finish the floor. The developers ordered it. "Why?" Lena asked. Hiroshi's voice cracked. "Because if we didn't pour, she would keep trying to climb out." He told her more. After the slab was laid, the workers began to hear humming in the rebar. Soft, sweet, like a lullaby with no language. Then came the stains, dark moisture blooming through solid surfaces, appearing overnight, forming small handprints. A wall once cracked in the shape of a face. They patched it. It returned. They tried to re-slab the floor. The mold reappeared. Eventually, the order came down: seal it, renumber the building, forget. And they did. Almost. Back in her apartment, Lena walked slowly through the rooms. She pressed her hands against each wall. She no longer asked if the building remembered. She knew it did, because the concrete still shifted beneath her fingers, still held warmth where it shouldn't, still trembled softly, like lungs that had never exhaled. At 3:13 a.m., the floor beneath her table changed. One tile darkened, just one. She knelt and touched it. It was damp, and for the first time, warm. She ran her fingers across the grout, and they came away covered in gray dust and something red. Blood. Not fresh, not wet, but old, as if the floor had finally decided to remember what it buried. The next day, Lena emailed the development board. She asked for the name of the spiritual inspector who had canceled the clearance ceremony. No one replied. But hours later, a private number called. An old voice answered. The man only gave his surname, Ichiro. He had been hired to bless the site. He had walked the entire foundation until he reached the core shaft that was to become floor 8. There was no breath, he told her over the phone. The ground accepts prayer if it is empty, but this one was already full. He had left incense in each corner, but the smoke refused to rise. It sank, pooling like fog trapped in stone. He said no more, only warned her, if the prayer is unfinished, the spirit is not asleep, it is just listening. That night, Lena sat on her living room floor. She lit 4 candles, one in each corner of the room, held the broken mirror shard in her lap, and whispered, I know what they did to you. You don't have to stay in the concrete anymore. The walls pulsed. A breeze swept through the room, though no windows were open. And on the wall behind her, a wet handprint appeared, then slid down as if someone had tried to pull themselves through. Lena turned slowly and saw, in the center of her living room, a girl kneeling, Miko, crying, her hands on the floor. She looked up, her voice cracking. I can't leave. She's still holding me down. Lena asked, Who is she? Miko turned toward the ceiling, and from above, footsteps, slow, dragging, like someone pacing in thick mud. Lena whispered, The concrete remembers, and now I do. It began with a flicker, just a soft pulse in the corner of her ceiling where no light fixture existed. At first, Lena thought it was her imagination, a stress-induced illusion. But then it came again, night after night, always at the same time, 3:13 a.m. A warm amber light, not from a bulb, not from the hallway, but from above. It didn't flash like electricity. It swayed, as if a lantern were swinging in a room overhead, a room that wasn't supposed to be there. On the third night, she set up her phone on a tripod, pointed directly at the ceiling. She turned off all other lights, sat in silence, and waited. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the light returned, dimming in, growing stronger, then gently drifting side to side like it was hanging from a chain. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. Then the light darkened for a second, as if something had passed in front of it, a silhouette, no shape, just absence. She picked up her phone with trembling hands and reviewed the footage. What she saw did not belong in her home. The video showed what her eyes had only half understood, a room above her, not just ceiling, but airspace. A wooden beam, part of an unfinished ceiling structure, crept into view as the light swayed. There was dust in the air, and shadows. Then a shape passed by. Not a full figure, just legs, barefoot, dragging slowly across the frame. She played the clip again, slowed it down. This time she saw it clearly. A foot with missing toes, skin cracked like dried clay, a shadow like rotted cloth brushing the edge of the lantern light. Something was pacing up there. In that space between floors, in that room the blueprints said didn't exist. She couldn't sleep, not after that, not when her ceiling might have footsteps, or worse, eyes. So she opened the blueprint files again, toggled every lighting plan, wiring map, vent layout, and finally found something that hadn't been erased. A note from the subcontractor. Do not run ceiling fixtures for Level 8 meditation hall. Ambient lantern to be hung manually post-ceremony. Manual lantern. No electrical feed. So the light she was seeing wasn't artificial. It was a real flame. Lit by someone or something still up there. She returned to the stairwell, the one hidden behind the mirror panel, the one she had opened before. She descended quietly, each step more reluctant than the last. The lower landing was the same, quiet, hollow, and holding the weight of something left behind. This time, she brought a thermal scanner, basic, used by engineers to detect hidden piping. She aimed it upward, and the screen lit up red, directly above her head, a heat source, moving, slowly, back and forth, not random, pacing. She turned off the scanner, stood in silence, then heard it again, a chain creaking, like a lantern slowly twisting, then a crack, wood splitting under weight, then breathing. Not hers, not Miko's, but heavy, wet, strained, as though someone hadn't inhaled for years and had just now remembered how. She backed up the stairs, closed the panel. This time she nailed it shut, but the light still returned, every night. The glowing amber warmth, the silent pacing, the momentary eclipse when something passed before the flame. She showed the video to Mr. Haruto from 6A. He watched in silence, sipped his tea, then nodded slowly. "You know what this means," he said. Lena whispered, "Tell me." Haruto looked tired. Someone still lives there. Not the girl, someone older, someone who was supposed to be forgotten. He looked up at her. There was more than one death in the construction accident. Lena frowned. "Miko's the only record I found, because the other was unofficial." She waited. Then he said it. The woman who died was a medium, a spiritual assistant. She tried to finish the prayer alone, but she died during the slab pour. Lena whispered, "Then who was she trying to seal?" Haruto didn't answer. He only said, "The lantern you see is hers. She never left because the ceremony never ended." That night, the light above the ceiling returned again, but this time it changed color, from amber to blue, like flame turning cold. And then, for the first time, it began to descend, a faint glow pressing through the plaster, light bleeding at the seams. Lena stood beneath it, frozen, and in that light, for a brief second, she saw the outline of a woman suspended upside down, hair dangling, arms outstretched, face twisted into something between scream and silence. Then the light snapped off, instant, gone, and the room returned to darkness, but the smell of burnt incense remained. Lena fell to her knees, and for the first time since moving in, she began to pray, not to be safe, but for the prayer that was never finished to finally reach her. Before the woman in the ceiling stepped down. The building no longer slept, not during the day,
not during the night. It watched now. It listened, and it remembered every step Lena took within it. The light above her ceiling hadn't returned, but the scent had lingered. Charred incense, faint and bitter, like the smoke from a prayer that never reached heaven. And with it came something worse. Not movement, not voices, but stillness, heavy, breathless, as if the air was waiting for a ritual to finish, one that began a decade ago and never found its final word. Lena dug deeper into the archived development contracts. In a sealed appendix, she found a page labeled Ceremonial Report, Level 8. The document was short, 2 paragraphs. The purification ceremony, it said, was to take place before finalizing the slab pour, to honor the resting spirits of those who may have once occupied the land, a tradition rooted in ancient architectural customs. It listed a monk Aso Ren as the presiding spiritual authority, but scrawled beside his name in red pen was a note, "Walked off site, refused to return, ceremony incomplete." Lena searched until she found him. He lived alone in a mountain temple, a day's drive away. She didn't make an appointment, she simply went. When she arrived, Monk Aso was sweeping the stone steps. Old now, with thin shoulders and clouded eyes, but when she spoke the words, Sorahites, his hands stilled. He sat with her inside the prayer hall, beneath faded murals of celestial gates and binding knots. "I remember the girl," he said quietly, "too young to die alone, too stubborn to let go." "You saw her?" Lena asked. "I felt her," he replied, "in the stone, in the water beneath it, in the hair coiled in the wind." He stared at her. "You broke the panel, didn't you?" Lena didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "That floor was supposed to be consecrated, not closed, not erased. We never rang the final bell. We never offered the 7th stick of incense." She asked, "What happens when a ritual is interrupted?" He looked up. "The spirit doesn't sleep. It waits for the moment the door is touched again, and then it opens." Lena told him everything. The footsteps, the mirror, the stairwell, the child, the woman with the sealed mouth. Monk Aso listened without blinking. She was the medium, the one meant to help the girl pass on. "She died too," Lena whispered. He nodded. "Then neither of them crossed over, because the ritual had no ending, and without an ending, the invitation remains open." Lena's voice trembled. "Can it be finished now, after all this time?" He was quiet, then said, "Only if you do it from inside the space, not near it, not above it, inside." Back home, Lena stood in front of the elevator. The building felt colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. The elevator hummed softly, its light dimmed. She pressed 7, then 9, then the door close button. Waited. The screen blinked. 8. For just a second. The elevator stopped. Doors cracked open. This time, Lena stepped forward. The air inside the 8th floor was heavy, not dusty, but thick, like breathing through soaked cloth.
The hallway was unfinished, narrow, the walls bare and sweating. Candles had once been mounted along the beams, now only the brackets remained. But in the center, beneath a collapsed offering table, she found the bell, unrung, unforgiven. She placed it on the floor, lit a stick of incense, and whispered the chant Monk Aso had written for her on yellow paper. Let what was sealed be seen. Let what was seen be spoken. Let what was spoken be free. The incense smoke curled upward, at first, then reversed. It sank, pulled downward by some unseen force. The temperature plummeted. The concrete beneath her knees cracked, a hairline fracture, from which a hand emerged. It wasn't Miko's, too large, too long, too old. The woman, the medium, still bound, still waiting. Her lips were stitched shut, not with thread, but with blackened wire. Her eyes were open, bleeding, silent. Lena knelt before her and whispered, "You never finished the prayer. Let me do it for you." And then she rang the bell, 7 times. On the 7th strike, the woman's mouth opened, slowly, with the sound of metal tearing, and from her throat came one word, release. Then the bell cracked. The incense turned to ash. The floor pulsed once beneath her knees, and the woman crumbled into soot, into salt, into silence. The elevator took her back to 9, but she could no longer feel her legs. The building was quiet. For the first time, truly, deeply quiet. No steps, no cries, no breathing behind the walls. Only the sound of something that had been waiting to end. Finally, ending.
Lena didn't sleep after the ritual. She didn't dream. She just sat at her table as the morning light bled through the curtains, casting long streaks of pale warmth across her cold floor. But warmth no longer comforted her, because silence had changed its meaning. The building was no longer angry, but it wasn't peaceful either. It was waiting, not for screams, not for answers, but for a return. That afternoon, she revisited the hidden stairwell. The panel she had nailed shut now stood ajar. No breeze had moved it. No person had pried it open. It had invited her. She descended slowly. The concrete steps cooled beneath her fingers as she brushed the railing. At the bottom, beneath a rusted water pipe, she noticed something she hadn't before. A small metal key taped behind a loose brick. Dust-covered, but labeled in faded red, ELV LVL8 Override. Back in her apartment, she opened the elevator panel. Inside, behind the standard circuitry, was a slot just the right size for the key. She slid it in, turned it. The elevator lights flickered. A single chime rang out, not the mechanical tone, but something lower, older. The panel lit up. A new button appeared. 8. Unblinking. Waiting. She pressed it. The elevator didn't jolt. It sank. Downward. Though it shouldn't have. And when the doors opened, the hallway before her was no longer ruined.
The last time she had visited floor 8, the walls had been cracked, the air heavy with decay. Now, it was clean, perfect, preserved. The floor was lined with smooth wood, soft tatami mats edged each side. Lanterns glowed gently, suspended from thin hooks in the ceiling. And at the far end, beneath a beam carved with ancient prayer symbols, stood a single door. 808. The brass handle was polished, the wood oiled, the number carved, not painted, as though it had been here far longer than the building itself. She walked the length of the corridor, each step muffled by the mats. Her own breathing felt louder here, too loud. She stopped in front of the door, pressed her palm against the center. It was warm. She turned the knob. It opened without resistance. Inside, the room was not an apartment. It was a shrine. Sparse, still, sacred. The floor was stone, ringed with salt. At the center, a single mat, a small table, a cracked bowl of dried rice, and a stick of incense, still burning. Smoke curled slowly in the shape of a spiral, not rising, not falling, just turning, endlessly. Lena stepped inside, closed the door behind her. The air was different here. It felt like breath held too long, like a song paused at its final note. She stepped toward the mat and saw what she hadn't noticed before. A set of small footprints in the dust, bare, child-sized, leading to the table, then circling back to the corner of the room, to a spot where a mirror once stood, its edges still outlined in residue. She touched the stone where it had rested. And then, from the far corner of the room, a voice spoke. Not loud, not angry, just knowing. You came back. She turned. No one was there. Just the hanging incense smoke. And then, you finished the prayer, but I am still here. Lena dropped to her knees. Her voice shook. Who are you? The voice didn't answer. Instead, the lantern overhead flickered, and for a brief moment, a silhouette appeared beneath it. A woman, hair down, eyes covered by a strip of cloth, hands clasped in front of her. Lena whispered, Are you the one holding Miko here? The figure said nothing, but the temperature dropped. The smoke bent sideways. Then the voice returned. She was not meant to die. Neither was I. But they buried us in different ways, one in concrete, the other in silence. Lena stepped toward the figure. If I remember you, will you let her go? The lantern stopped swaying. The air stilled. The woman's head lifted, and Lena saw it, not anger, not sorrow, but exhaustion, as if she had been carrying the memory of the dead for so long she had forgotten what she was before it. She whispered, I remember both of you. Then she took the last incense stick from the table, lit it, and placed it beside the first. She bowed once, deep, without fear, and the room breathed for the first time. The salt circle cracked, the footprints faded, the smoke lifted, this time upward, and in that smoke, Lena saw two shapes, a child, a woman, hand in hand, walking away. not out of the room, but through the light itself, until they disappeared. The incense burned out, the lantern dimmed, and when Lena stepped out of room 808, the hallway had changed again. Dust covered the mats, the lanterns hung broken, the wood warped with age, and when she turned to look back, the door was gone. Only a blank wall remained. The elevator took her up without sound. No buttons flashed, no floors were marked, just a quiet ascent. And when the doors opened, she was home. But something had lifted. No more scratches, no more breathing, no more light above the ceiling. Only a whisper carried on the air, faint, fading. Thank you. The silence should have comforted her, but Lena knew better. The dead don't leave with noise. They leave with absence. And sometimes, absence is louder than anything else. For 3 nights after room 808 vanished, the building slept. Truly, fully, quietly. No scratches, no flickering light, no incense burned behind the walls. It was over. And yet, she wasn't done. Lena felt it deep in her chest, an itch, a weight, a space still left unfinished. Because even if the spirits had left, the room had not. On the 4th night, she woke up at 3:13 a.m. without setting an alarm. She didn't hear anything. She just felt it. A pull. Not from the elevator, not from the walls, but from inside herself. She dressed quietly, grabbed a candle. No phone, no recorder, no tools. Just breath, just memory. She walked back to the stairwell, through the hidden panel, down the steps, and found the landing again. This time, there was no sealed wall, no dust, just a single wooden door standing alone. No hinges, no frame, just the shape of a door, etched in shadow, and behind it, a breath. She pushed. It opened without sound. And there, once again, was room 808. But it was not like before. Now, it was breathing. The walls pulsed gently, like lungs behind wallpaper. The floor swelled and settled with a rhythm too slow for machinery, too alive for coincidence. There was no lantern, no salt circle, no shrine. Only the sound of wood stretching and something humming softly in the bones of the building. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her, but she didn't turn around. At the center of the room, a table. On it, a single object, a journal, worn, soft from touch, tied with red string. She opened it slowly, each page written in flowing feminine strokes, not hurried, but trembling. Entry 1. She won't speak to me, but she follows me from corner to corner. I know she's here. I light incense every day, but she doesn't want release. She wants to be remembered. Entry 3. They told me I could help her pass, that if I prayed hard enough, if I offered the rice, the salt, the bell, she would move on. But the moment I stepped inside this room, she claimed me too. Entry 5. I feel her pacing above my ceiling now, just like they used to say. It never ends at 3:13. It begins. and it begins with breath. Entry 8. The concrete will hold her body, but the air holds her memory, and memory does not rot. It waits. It waits for someone to listen. Entry 10. If anyone finds this, know this place was never cursed. It was never angry. It was never hungry. It was just lonely. Final entry. I tried to carry her voice across the barrier. I failed. But maybe someone else will finish the last sentence, not with prayer, but with presence. Lena let the book fall closed, and then she sat, cross-legged, hands resting in her lap. No fear, no movement. And the room responded. The floor vibrated softly beneath her, not violently, just enough to feel heartbeats. Then the walls inhaled, a long, slow pull of air, as if the very architecture of the space was drawing life back into itself. The breath became a hum, and the hum became a voice, not from behind the walls, but from inside them. A whisper, faint, feminine. You saw me. Lena whispered back, yes. You stayed. I listened. That is enough. The hum faded, the pulse slowed, the air warmed, and the building, for the first time, exhaled. She stood, placed the journal gently on the table, and stepped toward the door. But there was no need to open it, because the room no longer needed her to stay. The door opened on its own, and behind her, room 808 slowly dimmed, not from darkness, but from peace, as though a held breath had finally been let go. Back in her apartment, Lena stood beneath her ceiling. No light, no footsteps, no scratches, only stillness. And on the wall near her bed, etched faintly into the paint, she saw a new mark, a small spiral, drawn in dust, and beneath it, "Thank you for remembering us." The building was calm, not just quiet, calm, like the sigh after grief, like the hush after something has finally let go. Unit 808 was gone. The stairwell was bricked over, and the wall behind Lena's hallway mirror had been sealed with fresh plaster. The air didn't watch her anymore. The ceiling didn't breathe, and at 3:13 a.m., nothing stirred. But Lena couldn't leave, not yet, because she knew something others didn't. Some things, when buried, stay dead. Others move upward. She reported everything, quietly, privately. The journal, the hidden floor, the unfinished ritual. A preservation team came, engineers, inspectors, spiritual surveyors in plain clothes with quiet hands. They scanned the building, took notes, said little. They didn't dispute what she said. They only nodded and scheduled the final sealing. But they didn't ask her to leave. So Lena stayed. One more night. Just to make sure the building was at peace. Just to make sure nothing else had been forgotten. She watched the workers from her window. They moved with a kind of reverence.
Not fast, not loud. When they passed her floor, they didn't speak, only looked at her door, nodded politely, and kept going. At 6 p.m., they finished. By 7 p.m., they left. By 10 p.m., the building felt closed, done. But at 3:13 a.m., the elevator dinged. Lena sat up in bed. She hadn't been expecting it, not anymore. She opened her door. The hallway was dim, still. The elevator doors were open, waiting. She stepped inside, pressed the panel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. Normal, just like always. Except at the bottom right corner of the panel, where nothing had ever been before, a new button had appeared. Not glowing, not blinking, just quietly there. 10. Her heart slowed. She didn't remember anyone building a 10th floor. She pressed it. The button warmed beneath her finger, softly, like breath against skin. And the elevator began to rise. It passed the 9th floor without stopping, without slowing. And then a pause. The lights inside the elevator dimmed. Not failure, not flicker, just shadow, drawn inward. The floor indicator stayed blank. No numbers, no chimes. Then the elevator stopped with a gentle shudder, and the doors opened. What lay before her was not a hallway, not an apartment, not a stairwell, but a void, endless, still, lined with floating lanterns that burned without fire, without smoke. Beneath her feet, tiles that pulsed like skin. Above her, ceiling beams made of something older than wood. The walls breathed, not as before, not in pain, but in memory. Every surface held echo, every light whispered. And Lena understood. This wasn't a place built by contractors. This was a floor built by grief, by memory, by witness. In the center of the room stood a small wooden stool. On it, a single object, a nameplate, carved from stone, smooth from years of unseen touch. Lena stepped forward, kneeled, and read the name, Miko Hoshino. Below it, she was here, and now she is not forgotten. A second stool stood beside it, empty. She placed something there, the mirror shard she had kept all this time. It reflected nothing, not her, not the room, only light. Then, behind her, a whisper. Not a voice, not a name, just breath, welcoming. And she turned, saw a hallway she hadn't noticed before, lined with doors, all unmarked, all closed, all waiting. She stepped back into the elevator, pressed 9. The panel blinked, then lowered her gently, quietly to the world she had left. The doors opened. Her floor was unchanged. No one waiting, no sound, only the soft hum of electricity and the faint warmth of incense in the air. The next day, workers sealed the elevator override, welded the panel shut, replaced the circuitry, painted the wall clean. No button 8, no button 10, just the building as it had always been. But Lena knew, and the building did too. Because some nights, when the air is just still enough, and the hour leans against the veil, she hears it. Not footsteps, not whispers, just the soft ding of an elevator that no longer exists, and when she listens close, she can almost hear the doors opening on a floor that was not built, but still remembers her.